Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're taking a close look at some really interesting source material you shared with us about Australia's, incredible push towards electric vehicles. Our mission to try and pull out the key actionable lessons that could, maybe offer a roadmap for Europe's own transition. Okay, so let's unpack this a bit. Usually, when you think EV success stories, maybe China or Norway comes to mind,
Well,
right?
exactly.
But the sources we've got suggest Australia is moving really fast, almost like they're writing a new playbook for how a big, car-loving country shifts from sort of niche adoption to a more mature mass market.
Yeah, it's true. And what's fascinating, I think, is the sheer speed of it all. We're not just looking at good sales figures, though they are good.
Right.
We're seeing specific policies, market dynamics that are actually creating this, self-sustaining EV environment. It's competitive, it's growing. And if Europe is serious about its climate goals, really understanding how Australia is pulling this off, it's critical. They're kind of becoming a benchmark for that complete ecological transition in action.
Okay, let's ground this in some numbers then. Straight from the Electric Vehicle Council, the EVC, their latest report. I mean, the pace of growth just jumps out at you.
It really does.
Australians bought, 72,758 new EVs in just the first half of 2025.
Yeah, and just to clarify for everyone, that number, it includes both the pure battery electric vehicles, the BEVs, and also the plug-in hybrids, PHEVs.
Okay.
And compared to the first half of 2024, that's a huge jump, 24.4% increase. Massive.
Wow, and that pushed their EV market share up to, 12.1% of all new car sales in that period?
That's right. And there was even a peak in June 2025 where it hit almost 16%.
16%. That really feels like they've crossed some kind of threshold, doesn't it? Like real consumer acceptance kicking in.
Definitely feels like a tipping point. But, we should keep some perspective, too. Even with this amazing growth, EVs are still only about 2% of all the cars actually on Australian roads.
Okay, so the overall fleet transformation still has a very long way to go.
A long way, yeah.
Yeah.
The climb is steep, no doubt. But the momentum is there. The national EV fleet is now over 410,000 vehicles as of September 2025. So they're definitely past that early adopter phase and scaling up.
Right, scaling up. Which brings us to infrastructure. You can't sell all those cars if people worry about where to charge them. How are they keeping the lights on, so to speak?
Well, that's a key point in the sources. The infrastructure growth is actually mirroring the vehicle sales growth. That's a really good sign strategically. Australia now has 12,272 fast charging locations. That's up 20% since mid-2024.
And fast charging is key for longer trips, reducing that anxiety.
Exactly. And maybe even more crucial for convincing the average buyer is the growth in high-power public charging. So think, destination chargers, roadside stops. There are now nearly 4,200 public plugs rated at 24 kilowatts DC or more.
That 24 kilowatt or minimum, that's important, isn't it? Because that's power that adds real range in a decent amount of time, not just trickle charging overnight.
Precisely. It tackles that friction point, that range anxiety head on. And that 22% increase in those high power plugs shows that, government and private companies are actively building out the network.
And what about choice? Are people just buying one or two popular models, or is the market broadening?
That's the other side of the coin. Policy is working to increase choice. The total number of EV models available, BEVs and PHEVs together, is up to 153 now.
153.
Yeah, that's up from 123 just a year earlier in mid-2024. So 30 new models in a year. That choice, it fuels competition.
And competition hopefully means better prices for buyers.
That's the idea. More choice, more competition, better value.
Okay, so we've established sales are booming, infrastructure's growing, choice is expanding. You mentioned policy earlier. Sales like these don't just happen spontaneously.
Yeah, at all.
This is where it gets really interesting, I think. The EVC report actually gave the federal government a score, right? Like 8 out of 10 on EV policy.
Yeah, they did, which is pretty high praise.
So what specifically earned them that score? What are the big policy wins?
The sources highlight two really big levers. First, there was something called the electric car discount. That directly tackled the upfront cost issue, making EVs more affordable for people.
Okay, direct financial help. Makes sense. What's the second one?
The second, and maybe even more powerful in the long run, is the introduction of the new vehicle efficiency standard.
Right, the efficiency standard. Can you unpack that a bit? Because that sounds like the kind of big structural policy Europe should be looking at really closely.
I think so too. Basically, it sets mandatory emissions targets for the entire fleet of cars sold by each automaker in Australia.
Ah, okay, so it's not per car, but an average across everything they sell.
Exactly. If a car company sells a lot of, say, big SUVs with high emissions, they have to balance that out by selling enough low or zero emission vehicles, meaning EVs.
So it forces their hand.
It essentially creates a market mandate for EVs. Instead of just offering maybe some weak incentives, the standard makes global car giants prioritize sending their best, newest EV models and a wider range of them to Australia. They need those EVs to meet their average targets.
That's clever. It's a supply-side push, guaranteeing more options land in showrooms.
Precisely. It ensures the supply is there for consumers to choose from.
But even with all this success, there's pressure to go even faster, right? The EBC head warned that growth needs to accelerate to hit future climate targets.
Yeah, the targets are ambitious. The immediate goal is 1 million EVs on the road before 2028.
1 million before 2028. That sounds like a huge leap from the current 410,000.
It is. To get there, sales need to ramp up incredibly quickly. We're talking 145,000 EV sales needed in 2025, then jumping to 240,000 in 2026 and 320,000 in 2027.
Wow.
And longer term, the ambition is 50% of all new car sales being electric within the decade.
So they really need to move beyond just the early adopters and tech enthusiasts.
Absolutely. This is about getting the early majority on board now, the average car buyer.
Okay, speaking of the market maturing, the sources mentioned something interesting. A Tesla slump. Now, Tesla was dominant for so long. Seeing their market share fall, isn't that like a bad sign, a red flag?
That's a really good question. And
Yeah.
yeah, intuitively, you might think, oh no, interest is waning. Tesla had something like, what, over 68% of the Aussie EV market in early 2023?
Huge dominance.
Huge. But that share dropped significantly. It even hit a low of just over 8% in 1 month, April 2025. Now, sales volumes bounce around, but the trend,
So is that bad news?
actually, no. The sources argue this is probably the clearest sign of a healthy, maturing, competitive EV market.
How so? Less Tesla dominance is good.
Think about it. Tesla's share is shrinking, not because people stopped buying Teslas necessarily, but because the whole EV pie is getting much, much bigger, and there are loads more companies fighting for a slice.
So it's not about Tesla failing, it's about everyone else succeeding too.
Exactly. Australian consumers now have, what, 100 different EV models to choose from? That wasn't the case just a few years ago.
And who's providing that competition?
A lot of it is coming from Chinese brands like BYD and MG.
Yeah.
They're bringing really competitive, high-value options to the market. So when Tesla's share goes down because buyers are spoiled for choice with other great options, that's actually a win for the overall transition.
Right, because that competition keeps everyone honest on price and features.
Precisely. It's exactly the kind of competitive dynamic Europe needs to encourage to make EVs accessible to the masses.
Okay, so we've seen the national picture, strong growth, policy drivers, maturing market. But let's zoom in. The sources talk a lot about New South Wales, NSW, and their government fleet strategy, like a concrete example of how to actually do this transition on the ground.
Yes, this is super important because government fleets, they're a huge lever. They can drive initial demand, help establish charging infrastructure, and eventually feed the used EV market.
Makes sense. So what's NSW doing?
Well, they've got a big fleet, around 20,000 vehicles. They're aiming to convert it, starting with about 12,000 passenger cars. And they've set really clear, tough targets.
Such as?
100% of their passenger vehicle purchases must be EVs by 2030, and an interim target of 50% by 2026.
100% by 2030 is ambitious for a government fleet. How do they enforce that? Just hope departments comply.
No, this is where the governance detail gets interesting. They have an official EV-first policy,
EV first?
meaning if a government agency wants to buy a regular petrol or diesel car instead of an available EV, they need executive approval to justify why.
Wow. Okay, so the default is electric, and you need special permission not to choose electric.
Exactly. That kind of top-down accountability, it forces change. It makes agencies figure out the charging solutions instead of just using infrastructure gaps as an excuse.
That must be hard to implement across a big bureaucracy, though.
Oh, I'm sure it presents challenges.
Yeah.
But it signals seriousness. And to back it up, they're planning major infrastructure work. They're electrifying 240 government sites
Okay.
and aiming for a pretty ambitious one-to-one charger-to-vehicle ratio at those sites. They're getting the infrastructure ready before the big wave of EV purchases hits, especially for the financial year 2025-26, when they expect things to really ramp up.
That forward planning on charging seems critical. A big lesson there.
Absolutely. But it's not just about the cars and plugs. The sources also stress the people side of things.
Mm.
change management.
Right. You can't just hand someone keys to a new EV if they've driven petrol cars their whole life and expect it to go smoothly.
Exactly. NSW is apparently doing things like EV days, letting staff try the vehicles, try before you buy schemes for departments, getting buy-in from the drivers, the fleet managers, making it feel like a positive change, not something forced on them.
Collaboration, not just mandate. Makes sense.
Yeah, overcoming that natural resistance is key.
And there was one other piece in the NSW strategy that really caught my eye, the data strategy. It sounded quite sophisticated.
Ah, yes, this is a brilliant detail. So they decided to allow different types of charging hardware across their various sites.
Okay, flexibility there.
BUT. They mandated a single, unified software solution to manage all that charging. Specifically, they're using a system called ChargeFox.
Why mandate the software but not the hardware? What does that achieve?
It gives them consistent, holistic data across the entire fleet, regardless of the charger type.
Huh.
All the agencies get this single view of charging behavior, how much energy is used, what it costs, and crucially, how much CO2 they're saving.
Ah, so they can actually track the benefits in real time across the whole operation.
Precisely. It allows the fleet managers to make smart decisions, optimize charging, and importantly, prove the financial and environmental value of the switch to budget holders and stakeholders.
It turns fleet electrification from just an environmental target into a data-driven, optimizable operation.
You got it. And that is a playbook any government agency or large company in Europe could basically copy and paste tomorrow.
Okay, brilliant. So let's pivot now to the core question of this deep dive. We've seen Australia's success driven by things like the efficiency standard pushing supply and detailed plans like NSW showing how to implement it. What's the single biggest takeaway for Europe from all this momentum?
Well, the sources are pretty clear that Europe can definitely learn from Australia's overall approach, using these macro strategies as a benchmark. But drilling down, the argument presented is that the most powerful lever, especially for hitting true mass market adoption, it comes down to the pocketbook.
The pocketbook, you mean focusing on costs?
Yeah, but specifically the running costs,
Yeah.
making the day-to-day operation of an EV undeniably cheaper than a petrol or diesel car.
So less focus maybe on just the initial purchase price discounts and more on the cost of electricity for charging.
That's the argument. The sources critique some current European approaches. Take Italy's incentives, for example. They offer quite generous grants, up to $11,000 a year if you scrap an old car.
Sounds great.
But those top-tier incentives are often tied to things like having a low IC score. That's Italy's sort of economic indicator for means testing.
Right. I've heard of IZ, so it targets lower income households.
Which is a valid goal in itself, but the sources argue that by making the best incentives conditional like that, you might only be appealing to a relatively small slice of the potential market.
Okay, so it's too targeted, perhaps.
Potentially. The argument is that a broader, more universal approach focused on charging costs could be more effective for mass adoption, specifically intervening to guarantee lower, or at least more transparent and stable, prices at public charging stations.
Because that gives every driver, regardless of their income bracket when they bought the car, clear, ongoing proof that running the EV is saving them money compared to filling up with petrol.
Exactly. If you combine that guaranteed running cost saving with policies like Australia's efficiency standard that ensure plenty of models are available, the switch becomes almost, well, irresistible for a much larger group of people.
It moves from a nice to have if you can afford it to a financially smart choice.
That's the idea. That's the solution that could really accelerate the transition across the board in Europe, make the operational savings undeniable and universally felt. Australia is setting the stage. Europe could potentially simplify and amplify that focus on running costs.
So, wrapping it up, Australia's success seems built on a combo of strong national policy, like that efficiency standard forcing manufacturers' hands, coupled with really detailed, practical implementation like we saw in NSW, especially with their fleet and data strategy.
Yeah.
And all that feeds a competitive market that gives consumers real choice and makes EVs more accessible. That seems to be the roadmap Europe needs.
I think that's a fair summary.
Yeah.
But, the sources also remind us the road ahead is still steep for Australia and for Europe.
Right.
And that brings us to maybe a final thought for you, the listener, to mull over.
Go on.
Australia is already starting to grapple with the next big challenge. As more EVs hit the road, governments everywhere will see their revenue from fuel taxes decline sharply.
Ah, the road funding problem.
Exactly. So the question becomes, how do you design future road pricing? Road usage charges, perhaps. How do you design it fairly So it doesn't suddenly make EVs expensive to run and, slam the brakes on adoption just when you need it to accelerate most.
That's a huge policy challenge waiting just around the corner. Get it wrong, and you could undo a lot of good work.
Precisely. It's something that needs careful thought now before it becomes the next big barrier to people switching.
Mm.
A critical question for both Australia and Europe to solve.
A very important point to end on. Well, thank you for sharing those sources and diving deep into Australia's EV journey with us today. It's been fascinating. We'll catch you next time on The Deep Dive.